It's Sunday, 9:30 a.m. It's time for another Q&A episode, and I apologize, it has been a while. I delayed one by a week, and then that just spiraled. You guys and girls have been keeping me incredibly busy, and if you're new here, my name is James. I run KibbleWatches.co.uk, which is a place where you can buy and sell your pre-owned watches here in Clerkenwell, London. So I am very busy with doing that. This is a side thing. It's a bit of fun, a bit of something to give back to you, and just being incredibly honest. Now, at the moment, it is Clerkenwell Design Week outside, so it's incredibly busy and noisy, buildings being popped up, everything. One amazing thing about where we are, there's a lot that's always going on, but it does mean it's incredibly noisy, so I apologize for that. Now, I also want to say, hopefully, fingers crossed, by the time this video goes out, the new website is live. So still KibbleWatches.co.uk. We've been working on it for a little while, just wanting to get things right, and hopefully it's live. If it isn't, it will be live the following week, so fingers crossed it's live for this video. But yeah, it's going to be a bit of a shock at first, but once you get used to it, it's pretty much the same website, just a bit nicer looking. We've incorporated a lot more features. We've made it more user-friendly, a load more filters when you're looking at watches. Everything about it just operates a lot better, and it incorporates a lot of the things that people wanted. So I did a Q&A, sort of questions, and spoke to a lot of customers, got your feedback, and I've done my best to incorporate as much as possible. Some of it just isn't possible without a huge amount of coding, which costs a huge amount of money, and obviously we want to keep it within reason. Otherwise you could end up spending 20,000-30,000 pounds on a website, which is just not viable for us at this stage, that's for sure. So head on over there, hopefully it's live, check it out. We've got a new section called the Vault, which this beautiful piece, which we'll talk about in a second, is on, as well as a brand directory. So this is something we've been thinking about and building in the background for a while. As you probably know, when you click on a watch on the website, we have a little section called the brand, which is just a brief description of the brand itself. We have sold hundreds and hundreds of brands, and we have all that information. So we've compiled a web page of A to Z of all the brands we've currently had, and many we haven't, and many we're still missing, of course, with basic snippets of the brand. So you can get a feel for the brand, some basic points. It's not greatly, hugely detailed, like a massive article for each one. Maybe that's to come in the future. But it's just a good place to get a snippet about a brand like, I don't know, Avig, if you've never heard of them. Now, before we crack on with the 7 questions today, as always, if you would like your question answered in these videos, leave them down below in the comments section. Email me info@kibblewatches.co.uk, or send me a message on Instagram or WhatsApp stating that you want it in the Q&A, and if you want your name to be anonymous, or you just want an abbreviation, please let me know so I can do that ahead of time, because I don't want to say your full name if you don't want it, and I'll try to abbreviate anyway for people's privacy. But anyway, so what is on wrist? I am wearing a gorgeous watch, which is actually in the Kibble Watches Vault, which is hopefully live by the time you watch this video. It is a 1990s Blancpain Villeray triple calendar moon phase, Tiffany & Co signed, 18 karat gold with the bracelet. This is an incredible piece. One I hope will stay in the vault for a very long time, but I have to be honest, I don't know if I can justify keeping it forever in the Kibble Watches vault. So it is one, if you are seriously interested, send me a message. But I have to say, for most of the watches in the vault, that isn't the case. Please do keep that in mind, but this is kind of an exception. But yes, I'm wearing this today. It's absolutely gorgeous. Question number 1 is from Tariq. He says, have you ever bought a watch to resell and then loved it so much you couldn't bear to part with it? For now, yes, most watches I get through the door, to be completely honest with you. If you head over, and again, hopefully it's live because I'm referencing it so much, and if it's not, I really do apologize. It will be live soon. But if you head over to the vault, you'll see many watches in there that came to me exactly like that. They were purchased as stock. I get them in for inspection, and I just fall in love. I am a watch collector, first and foremost, I would say. Well, actually, I'm a watch dealer first and foremost, I guess. But I have always been a collector. I collected before I became a watch dealer, and I'm very fortunate to have some incredible watches, not all of which I can justify keeping long-term. Some are short-term. The watch I was wearing in the drop video yesterday, if you didn't see that, it was probably the Hoya Ortavia, because I'm going to swap out to that after. That's one of those watches. I'm enjoying it for a little while, but it has to come for sale. I can't justify keeping it. So yes, a lot of watches end up to me that way. And some have stayed the course. If you head over to the vault, there's many in there you'll see, and there will be many more to come. I'm going to try and update the vault every couple of months with an extra piece. I have a lot of pieces that are not in there, and a lot more pieces that are probably coming soon as well, so keep an eye out for that. Now, my question to you, would you be able to do this job for a living? I often get asked these kind of questions. I always wonder, as the collectors who watch this, could you do this? Could you genuinely keep your head straight when it comes to separating stock to personal? It's an incredibly hard thing to do, I have to be honest with you, and you sort of want to accumulate as much as you can. But as they say, you can't get high on your own supply. It is exactly one of those things. Do you think you have the self-determination to be able to do that? Some days I do, some days I don't. I look forward to hearing what you think. Could you do this as a living? Question number 2 is from Stuart. He asks, if you could only be in one camp, are you Rolex or Tudor? Great question. So I'm going to give 2 answers to this just to be annoying and awkward. If we're talking vintage, I am team Rolex. If we are talking modern, I'm surprisingly team Tudor. That might come as a surprise to some of you. The reason being, I think vintage Rolex is just fantastic, and I'm talking very early 4 and 5 digit references. You know, I own a 6694. It's one of my favorite watches I own. It's actually not in the vault. That's one that will be in the vault eventually. Yeah, I think vintage Rolex is always fantastic. Pre-Daytonas, you know, vintage Daytonas. Modern Rolex, I can appreciate it for what it is. I think build quality wise, they're some of the best watches out there, especially for the money. You have to excuse the noise. But I do think it doesn't fit with me, my style, what I like, what I gravitate towards personally. Of course, there's a few models I would love to own. For example, the now discontinued white gold Daytona Blue Dial. I can't remember the references off the top of my head. I think it's also called a John Mayer. That is gorgeous. I've tried it on a few times. That's a modern Rolex I absolutely love. But I would always still rather go vintage if I had that kind of money personally. Now, when it comes to modern Tudor, vintage Tudor, there's nothing wrong with at all. I just think vintage Rolex is more interesting for me personally. Of course, some models completely trump that, like the Tudor Monte Carlo, for example. That's a watch I would love to have one day. And I've even bought the WMT version, or nearly bought the WMT version multiple times, which is like the homage. If you have one of those, let me know. I wish I had picked one up. Of course, there's some vintage Tudors I would love to own. But for the most part, modern Tudor actually speaks to me more. For example, surprisingly, the Alinghi Red Bull Racing Pelagos, FXD, I think it's a Pelagos FXD, is incredible. I love that watch. I think it looks brilliant. Some of the new chronos they brought out. Whilst most of their watches are a bit big for my taste, design-wise, I do prefer personally. So that's my take. I look forward to hearing down in the comments. What's yours? Do you have a distinction as well? Do you separate between vintage and modern, have a different opinion? Or are you just team Rolex all the way through, or just team Tudor all the way through? I look forward to hearing in the comments. Question number 3 is from @Casper Ghosty. Apologies if I butcher anyone's name. I'm terrible with this. Have you ever had a difficulty, interesting story sourcing a part for a watch? Yes. So any watch there's even collectors out there will know the bane of our existence is watch repairs when it comes to vintage and sourcing parts. Now, that being said, most watches are completely fine, even if they're a bit tricky to service, like caliber 11 and 12s, for example, in the Hoya Octavias, which are micro rotor with a chronograph module. You know, they're not the nicest things in the world for watchmakers to service. They're just more complicated. There's more going on, but they're usually okay. Finding parts is usually reasonable. Some watches can be difficult. Now, where I find I get the most difficulty is not necessarily with sourcing, surprisingly, because I've been doing this long enough. I know enough watchmakers, and watchmakers know enough watchmakers. They all talk together. They all have things that each other don't have, and usually you can find it with enough time. The difficulty sometimes comes in with delicate movements. So I have a watch that's in for service at the moment that has been in probably over a year now, to be honest, and this is the second or third watchmaker it's been with, because the tolerances of the balance fitting in the case, this is an ultra thin Audemars Piguet, by the way, in gold, it's beautiful. The tolerances are so minute that one thing out of place or one thing not quite right, it just offsets everything. And timekeeping is terrible, and you've got to get that perfect balance. Literally in terms of the balance itself, but everything else. And it's just so small and finicky that most watchmakers don't want to do it. Most watchmakers who have tried, it gets to a point, and I think if they're being honest, and if watchmakers were all honest, most are, but sometimes they won't tell you the full truth, it's just too delicate. It's too difficult and too time consuming for them to bother, especially with the cost it would take, because if they charged on labor alone, the amount of hours they have to put into these things is where it's difficult. So that being said, do not hesitate buying vintage. I mostly enjoy vintage in the personal collection. And, you know, other than the odd story here and there, for the most part, things are super easy and fine. They might take a bit longer, but that's just the case with servicing in general. And parts, surprisingly, you can find them, you know, so don't be put off by that. But just be aware, some watches, it's probably like cars, you know, I'm not really into cars, but I know a lot of customers who are, and especially vintage. Sometimes it is an absolute nightmare getting things fixed. Things that can seem quite simple at first are really not. It's like a can of worms, so just keep that in mind. But that's my story. I would say I've got a watch that's been in repair probably over a year, probably a year and a half at this point, and I can't tell you when it will be back. I have no idea. You get to a point where you're just sort of winding the watchmaker up by asking every single week. So you just sort of got to leave them to it and let them get to it at their own time so it's done properly. That's the other thing. Let me know down in the comments if you have an interesting story when it comes to sourcing. I do hear from a lot of people slightly older, not older, like neo-vintage, 90s, 2000s watches from like major brands, Hamilton, Longines, Tag Heuer. Whenever they try and get these repaired with the brands, often they just won't repair them. Not always, but the amount of return undones I've seen with paperwork saying they just can't get the parts, or they can't do it. And we're talking a simple service on something that's just like an automatic ETA. So I have no idea what's going on there, but I see that a fair bit. And thankfully with those, our watchmakers can do them. But anyway, so question 4 is from Gunamo. He said, what would you say was the average dealer markup on luxury watches? Great question, something I've spoken about, I think, multiple times at length, and I can't give you an exact figure. The reason being, it varies massively depending on the watch, depending on the figures, depending on what we're talking about really. So I can give you a few anecdotal stories, if you will, or examples, and hopefully that gives you an idea. As I've spoke about in the past, there's a common figure that's thrown around, which is 10%. I think in the watch dealing world, if you can average somewhere between 10 and 12% overall, you're doing okay. That's a good margin to make in the watch world, which will come as a surprise to some people in other industries where they're looking at 100, 200% margin. You don't get that in the watch world, and you do occasionally, but usually on very cheap stuff. And that's another important distinction. So as you climb in value, the percentage will often, not always, but often get less because the actual number amount is more. So it's very simple math. 10% of 10,000 is 1,000. 10% of 100 is £10, right? If you're selling a £100 watch, you can't just be making £10. It is not worth anyone's time. If you're selling a £10,000 watch and making £1,000, that will be worth your time, of course. Now, if you're selling a £100,000 watch and making £10,000, that's very good. That's good numbers, right? That's not typically how it goes. The percentage usually gets less the higher the watch is, usually. Of course, there's always exceptions to these. So the guys selling Richard Milles, they're often on 3 or 4% maybe, sometimes 5%, sometimes they are making 10%. There's some dealers out there I know who deal in the very high echelon, and they say to them it doesn't matter the value amount, they want to be making 10% minimum because with a higher price tag, they're taking on more risk, which is completely valid as well. So it really depends on who you speak to, but an average rule of thumb, 10 to 12%, which sometimes people tell me it sounds like quite a lot, especially when you're talking about the bigger numbers. If you want to sell me your £10,000 Rolex, that says £10,000 in the market today, and I offer you somewhere between 8.5 and 9, some people are quite shocked at that, and I can see why initially, but when you really break it down, it makes a lot of sense. Let's say the list price is £9,995, £10,000. That's the list price. That's what we're listing it for and hoping to get. The reality is you don't always get what you list for. Sometimes you have to negotiate less. Sometimes there's part exchanges involved and it skews the figures. So when you take that into account, we're not necessarily making £1,000. We'll be making less. Then you have to take off transaction fees, margin scheme VAT. So in the UK, we have 20% VAT, and as watch dealers, we pay it on the margin we make. So let's say we make £1,000, £200 of that goes straight to the taxman as VAT. So we're left with £800. Then that £800 we have to take off everything else, the electricity, the premises, the insurance, the shipping costs, especially on expensive watches, the insurance cost is more. I could go on and on and on, but you get the point. So yes, 10 to 12% is the average we try and aim for. And one thing I have to make very clear on that, the lower the watch is, usually the higher that percentage is. As I just explained, if I'm selling a £100 watch, I can't be making £10. It's just not worth it. And this is why you very rarely see affordable watches on my page. Under £500 watches, I'll be honest with you, I struggle to buy because the price I have to buy them at often seems so unreasonable when you compare it with what you'd get if you sold it on eBay yourself. And the reason being, I can't justify making £50 on a watch anymore. It's just not viable, especially as I put the same amount of time in the photography, listing, all that kind of stuff, which is probably my own fault, but my ethos is, if you're buying a £500 watch with me, I want you to feel the same as if you bought a £5,000 watch, a £10,000 watch. Your value to me is the same as a customer, and I appreciate you. So that hopefully gives you an idea. I'd love to know, what did you think it was? You know, before I've told you, what do you think it is if you don't agree with me? Let me know down in the comments. What margin do you think watch dealers typically make? I'd love to know. Question number 5 is from Rocketeer76. He says, do you think the changes on selling fees on eBay will have an impact on your business? Fantastic question. Now, I believe I know the details, but I might be wrong on these, so I apologize. But if I'm not mistaken, eBay have scrapped their selling fees altogether for private individuals. And I think they charge a fee to the buyer now. I could be wrong on that, but I know as a seller, you don't pay any fees. I believe it's the case that the buyer pays the fees, because obviously eBay still have to make money in this process. I don't understand how they'd have a business if they didn't, unless they're just relying on dealers like me who use eBay and we get absolutely ruined when it comes to fees. They charge us a huge amount. Maybe that's the case, but if you are not paying the fee and the buyer is paying the fee is still being paid. So it's still being accounted into the cost. So when you sell a watch, this is the same thing with auction. You know, if you sell a watch for £1,000 and you don't have to pay any fees, but they have to pay, for simple maths, 10%, they're paying £1,100. So that's being costed into their price. So therefore, you're probably not going to be getting any more than you would previously if you paid the fees on eBay. Now that's if the buyer is paying the fees. Now if magically you don't pay any fees and the buyer doesn't pay any fees, then yes, you'll be working out much better selling on eBay than before when you sold on eBay where you got charged fees. Hopefully that makes sense, because if I'm not mistaken, the fee still exists, it's just you're not the one paying it. So it's still costed in for most people when they buy a watch. The same way it was costed in for you when you sold the watch. You probably, not always, but probably asked a little bit more to try and cover that fee so you net the amount you want to net. Hopefully that makes sense. I've tried to just make the simple math simple. But as I say, if it's not the case that you don't pay any fees, they don't pay any fees, the magical, mythical fee, I don't know how they do it, but let's say they are, free money, then yeah, that works out great. Now in terms of the impact on my business, eBay, Chrono24, other consigners, other places, all these things have always had an impact on my business and always will. The reality is I'm being offered more now and I have more stock now, and I'm buying more now and consigning more now than I've ever done before. So the demand is higher. Whether that's because demand in the industry is higher or my reach has grown, I think it's probably a mixture of both. And the reality is if you want to go and sell on eBay and you're comfortable doing that and you're willing to put in the time, you're probably not the sort of person who's consigning with me. Not always anyway. Maybe it's watch dependent, you know, because if you're selling with me, I'm taking a larger proportion, you know, of a consignment, or if I'm buying it outright, you know, my margin needs to be accounted in. So when you consider those things, if you're comfortable selling it, you're always going to go do that rather than just take a hit for the sake of it. A lot of the people who consign or sell to me, they don't want that hassle or they don't want the potential risks that are involved. They want to just send me the watch, get me to inspect it, give them a price, and they say yes or no. It's very simple, especially if you have a large collection. For example, this morning I put in an offer, I think for 14 watches in a collection. That figure is no doubt going to be less than he was hoping for because he priced each watch individually. Now, if he was to go sell each watch individually, he'd do a lot better, but then he's got to sell 14 watches, potentially to 14 different people, manage 14 different people's expectations, back and forth on questions, shipping, potential returns, you know, all that sort of thing. So there is a cost benefit for someone like that selling all 14 to me at a lower amount in one bulk go. Now, that doesn't always work out to be the case and not everyone sees it that way, but again, I'm just explaining that. So yes and no. eBay fees will always affect me, eBay selling will always affect me, but it will only affect me in certain ways. And this fee change I think has been around for a while and I am getting offered more. I'm actually getting offered more by people sending me links that they've got it on eBay. Because it's not sold there. And I think there's a massive, I could be wrong on this and I'd love to see the figures, but I believe there's a massive influx of people selling on eBay in general, watches. Therefore, the amount of watches for sale on eBay has increased, yet I don't believe the buying demand has increased, so therefore the options are more. So if anything, I think eBay is becoming less and less attractive. That's what I'm hearing from collectors, and of course some might sit there and say, well, of course you'd say that, you're a dealer. But we use eBay as well, so you know, take it as you will. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions, let me know. Question number 6 is from Nick A. He asks, which current British brands excite you the most, e.g. their look, style and direction? Great question. I think, you know, I have to be honest, I know a lot of the British brands personally, like the people behind them, and I support a lot of them, I stock a lot of them, I own a lot of them. But if I had to really be pushed to just choose one or two, let's go with two. Or three. Let's go with three. I'm terrible at this. I would probably say Schofield, Vertex, and Studio Underdog. Now, of course, there's Fizz, there's Farah, there's Pinion, there's Garrick. There's so many incredible brands, and I'll probably just miss loads, and I apologise. But the three that are really exciting me at the moment that I think are doing amazing things is Schofield, and I think they've got some incredible stuff to come. He's playing around with different cases and stuff. You know, he bought out the lights, which I own. Amazing watch. So good job to him, and his design's always fantastic. He's a design guy. So, you know, when you see the designs, you see the case backs, you see all that kind of stuff, it's amazing. Vertex, just great history, great brand. Don over there is fantastic, and I think they've got so many incredible things they could do. I'm excited to see what happens. He's quite, in my opinion, quite slow with the releases, but I think that means it's more thoughtful. I could be wrong, but I get the feeling each release is a bit more thoughtful than others. So I'm excited to see what's to come there. What was the other one? Studio Underdog. I just think they're an exciting brand, you know. Whilst not every single release is for me, and I think some of it is getting a bit repetitive, the figures that they're selling clearly disagree with me. They are selling more and more each batch release than ever before, and they are more and more successful every time, and I wish nothing but the utmost respect and success to Richard and the team there. They're doing incredible things. But I'm excited to see what's to come in the future, beyond the sort of Series 1, Series 2 and Series 3. What else are they going to do? What are they going to design? Where's the brand going to go? Are we going to see something really cool? You know, those kind of things. I think there's so much exciting potential there beyond just the Series 1 and the fun adaptations of that, and same with the Series 2 and Series 3. Yeah, that's what I'm excited for. So, sorry I didn't give you one, but they're my three. So let me know down in the comments what's yours. And the final question is from another Nick K. He asks, have you ever thought of doing a collector conversations with some of your customers? I'd be interested to see how someone's collection has been shaped and how you've played a hand in that. And he went on to say he'd be interested in doing it. So Nick, thank you very much for the question. And to get to the, yes, absolutely. It's something I thought about many times. I believe I maybe even have played around with a series many years ago doing something like that. I would love to do it. I would just want it done properly. This is the thing. I'll be honest with you, I don't have the time to really set it up. I don't have the time to really edit any more than the drop video and the Q&A and run the business and do everything else. So time is definitely a limiting factor. And I'll be very honest, I don't really want to employ anyone at the moment. You know, I'm happy with how things are. Granted, I don't have all the time in the world to do all the other things I want to do, but I am happy doing what I'm doing. So I don't know if it will happen. If I can get someone in who, one, is reasonable in price, also a watch person and wants to do it more of a passion project, obviously they'd be paid to do it. But if there was someone out there with all the equipment, with the knowledge, able to set up, able to edit, make it look all good, then yeah, I'd probably do it, because I have plenty of collectors, yourself included, who would be happy to sit down in front of a camera, talk about some of their collection, and again, you know, how I've impacted that. And I would even be interested in doing ones where that's not even a factor. Now, of course, as a business, as all that kind of stuff, the ROI there to sort of show how I shaped it and what they bought from me is always a good thing. But at the same token, you know, just to see some incredible pieces, and some of the collectors I have, you know, they're incredible. I don't know if they want to all be on camera, but there's certainly a fair few I can think of. You know, even if it was one a month or something like that, we could very easily fill that out. So yeah, maybe that is something in the future, but again, it'd have to be someone who is able to do all of the other bits other than the bit where I sit down and talk to them, essentially. If that person exists, if that's you, if you have loads of camera equipment, experience in videography and editing, and have the time, that's the other thing. A lot of these people are super busy, like I am, so I wouldn't expect them to do it for a lot less than they would probably charge a client. It would be more of a passion project, which is probably unreasonable to ask, which is why it's not happened, and I don't blame someone for not wanting to do that at all. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm at. So if that's you, let me know. It'd be fun to do. You know, I'm always asked about podcasts as well. Would I start a podcast? Absolutely. But again, time and editing and getting it distributed, I just don't have the time. So yeah, if there's anyone out there who wants something for their portfolio, let's say they're a bit light on work at the moment, let me know. Let me know. I'll be very interested to hear. So anyway, thank you all very much. 7 awesome questions, some really great questions in this episode, and I look forward to reading your questions for the next episode. I often read them to obviously put them on the doc sheet ready to answer, but I don't think about them in advance. I'll try not to anyway. So these are usually off the cuff, very raw, very honest, and I think that's what people are enjoying, so I'm going to keep doing it. So hopefully I'll see you either next week or the week after. I need to schedule these a bit better, but yeah, we'll see you all again next time. Take care.